A year ago, May, I looked and I was averaging 20 people on this tour.
And today we had
six. We had six.
America faces a tourism crisis in 2025.
International tourism to the United States has taken a hit since the start of the Trump administration.
The U.S. is tracking a big drop in tourism from around the world. Take a look at this. Travel from Canada and Mexico was down double digits in March.
Global airlines are not making announcements. They're making decisions, and those decisions are quietly abandoning the skies over America. The once crowded runways of JFK, LAX, and Miami International are no longer the center of the world's flight paths. One by one, major carriers are rerouting not because of war or protests, but because flying into the U.S. no longer makes strategic sense. Instead, flight frequency is surging into Asia, Africa, and the BRICS economies Jakarta, Nairobi, Sao Paulo, cities once peripheral now ascending. The shift isn't temporary, it's structural, and it's accelerating. According to current projections, the U.S. is on track to lose another 20% of its international air traffic by the end of 2025. The financial toll, a staggering $84 billion in lost airline revenue this year alone. But the bigger loss is invisible America's vanishing presence on the global flight map. Why is the world quietly flying past the United States? Without press conferences or breaking headlines, a quiet unraveling is underway across America's aviation network. One by one, international airlines are pulling back, not with drama, but with deliberate silence. Play Airlines has suspended all U.S.-bound routes, exiting the market entirely. Air Canada, once a staple of cross-border connectivity, has withdrawn from 8 American airports and canceled 5 core routes, severing links that once formed the backbone of regional traffic. Meanwhile, European giants Lufthansa and Air France have scaled back their transatlantic capacity, quietly shifting aircraft elsewhere without public explanation or media scrutiny. Nowhere is the fallout more visible than along the U.S.-Canada corridor. According to data from OAG, over 320,000 seats have been removed from this route alone, a staggering drop in capacity. And the pattern is deepening. Forward bookings have plunged by more than 70% each month through September, pointing to a prolonged contraction rather than a short-term adjustment. At the local level, the consequences are immediate and brutal. Mid-sized airports such as Stewart International in New York, Detroit Metropolitan, and Tampa have lost all of their international routes. These aren't marginal losses, they represent the erasure of entire global connections. And the reason isn't political conflict or regulatory shutdowns, but something harder to challenge global disinterest. These airports now stand as symbols of a larger retreat, not imposed from above but chosen from afar. As the rest of the world reconfigures its flight paths, much of America is simply being left off the map. The fallout is hitting hardest in secondary and border cities like Buffalo, Seattle, and Tampa, places that once relied heavily on international traffic to sustain their local economies. With global carriers pulling out, the effects are cascading through every layer of the urban ecosystem. Hotels that once operated at near full capacity during peak seasons now sit vacant, their lobbies empty and staff hours cut. Restaurants, taxis, and airport retailers, tightly linked to the flow of foreign travelers, are reporting losses of 30 to 50% in revenue, struggling to justify daily operations in the absence of international footfall. Job losses are mounting not through sweeping layoffs, but through a quiet erosion, hiring freezes, reduced shifts, and unrenewed contracts. Hundreds of positions are disappearing across tourism, logistics, and service sectors, and in many cases, the losses are permanent. These are not just economic numbers, they are livelihoods being stripped away in slow motion. At the same time, vast investments made in anticipation of future growth, terminal expansion, infrastructure upgrades, modernization projects are becoming financial burdens. Airports that borrowed heavily on the assumption of rising international demand now face ballooning debt and no clear path to recovery. Projects once hailed as strategic bets are being reclassified as costly miscalculation. This isn't just a temporary slowdown, it's a structural retreat, a quiet but consequential redrawing of the global aviation map. And cities on the periphery with fewer options and less political leverage are being left to absorb the shock alone with little recourse and even less attention. This isn't about protests in the streets or diplomatic standoffs at summits. The erosion of America's aviation relevance is being driven by forces that are quieter, but far more systemic tariffs and rising operational costs. Over the past year, foreign carriers flying into the U.S. have faced a punishing escalation in trade barriers. Tariffs of 25% from Canada and Mexico, 20% from China, and 10% from other key markets have dramatically inflated the cost of doing business across borders. The ripple effects have been immediate. Prices for essential components like aircraft parts, repair services, and ground operations have surged. Profit margins have thinned, and the business case for expanding or even maintaining U.S. routes has become increasingly difficult to justify. Compounding this pressure is the strength of the U.S. dollar, which has raised the effective cost of travel for international tourists.
The cost of airfare in this country has gotten so bad.
It's really expensive to travel in the US alone, much less abroad, and most of the time people are busy paying for healthcare.
Add to that a growing backlog in USS, visa processing, and many travelers are simply opting out. For airlines that depend on passenger volume to sustain international routes, the economics no longer add up. And it's not just foreign carriers making adjustments. Even major American airlines are sounding the alarm. Both Delta and American Airlines have pulled their 2025 financial guidance, citing a sharp decline in international booking and deep uncertainty around future costs. What was once a dependable revenue stream is now a high-risk operation, and the industry is responding accordingly. As one airline executive stated with unflinching clarity, flying into America no longer makes sense economically. The retreat from American skies is not a series of isolated decisions. It's a coordinated reorientation of global aviation strategy. Airlines are no longer chasing legacy prestige. They're pursuing growth, and increasingly that growth lies elsewhere. Turkish Airlines, often seen as a bellwether for emerging market connectivity, is expanding aggressively into Jakarta, Mumbai, and Sao Paulo, entirely bypassing the United States in its latest route expansion. Chinese carriers are cutting capacity to traditional U.S. gateways like Los Angeles and Chicago, while diverting resources toward Nairobi, Bangkok, and Lima cities that reflect a more dynamic and less restricted travel environment. Meanwhile, Gulf carriers such as Emirates and Qatar Airways are doubling down on routes to Singapore, Dar es Salaam, and other rising hubs. Their strategies signal a clear preference to invest in markets with scalable demand and fewer operational headwinds rather than persist in underperforming U.S. routes increasingly burdened by tariffs and policy friction. What's emerging is not just a temporary adjustment, but a new geographic logic. Southeast Asia, the BRICS nations, and African economies are becoming the gravitational centers of aviation's next chapter, fueled by demographics, infrastructure investment, and trade realignments. The implications for the U.S. are stark. Forecasts now project that international air traffic to and from the United States could shrink by another 20% before the end of 2025, resulting in an additional $10 billion in lost revenue. This isn't the fallout from crisis. It's the consequence of being strategically bypassed. America is no longer the undisputed hub of global air travel, and the cracks in that foundation are now clearly visible. In just the first quarter of 2025, international arrivals to the U.S. dropped by 9.7%, marking one of the steepest year-over-year declines in recent memory. But this is not simply a dip in tourism numbers. It signals a deeper, more permanent realignment. Around the world, the decision-makers of global mobility conference organizers, multinational investors, academic institutions are responding swiftly. Major international events once routinely held in cities like New York, San Francisco, or Chicago are now being rerouted to destinations with stronger global connectivity. Investors and students alike are choosing countries where flights are easier to find, visa processes less cumbersome, and travel costs more predictable. For American universities, cultural institutions, and international festivals, the impact is already measurable. Fewer international participants, reduced media attention, and declining global engagement. The loss isn't just economic, it's reputational. What's slipping away is more than just connectivity. It's influence, it's visibility. And as airlines reroute their aircraft and redirect capacity to more strategic regions, the U.S. risks being recast not as a destination, but as an afterthought. What industry insiders now describe as a flyover zone, a vast market that planes pass over but increasingly choose not to serve. This is the consequence of erosion, not collapse, and it's all the more dangerous for how quietly it's unfolding. Facing mounting pressure, the U.S. government has begun to acknowledge the growing aviation crisis. Officials have warned of the potential loss of international economic value tied to the sharp decline in foreign visitors, and the Department of Transportation is now considering targeted tax relief and stimulus packages aimed at encouraging airlines to maintain U.S. international routes. Domestic carriers are also adjusting course. American Airlines, Delta, and Southwest have all withdrawn their financial forecasts for 2025 and are actively reducing flight schedules, a defensive move to preserve margins amid shrinking international demand, policy-driven cost pressures, and weakening consumer sentiment. On the other side of the border, international airlines are making quieter but more decisive moves. Carriers like Air Canada, WestJet, Lufthansa, and Air France KLM have already suspended dozens of U.S.-bound routes. Their silence speaks volumes. In many cases, these airlines no longer see the American market as viable or worth defending. The response so far has been reactive, fragmented, and perhaps too late to reverse a trend already well underway. If international airlines no longer see value in betting on the United States, what does that say about America's standing in the global order? The departure of flights is not just a logistical shift, it's a signal, a sign that the world's connections, priorities, and growth centers are evolving while the U.S. risks being left behind. To reclaim its place, America must act, lower tariffs, rebuild trust with allies, and restore the market appeal that once made it the natural destination for global commerce, education, and travel. Because if this retreat continues unchecked, it won't just be temporary, it will be permanent. Do you think the U.S. can turn this around, or is the decline already too deep? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your take.